Given the recent events in the market as far as GME, it's only fitting that we do a video explaining what a short squeeze is. And the easiest way to do this is if we take an example. So let's assume that there is a company X which has 9 shares outstanding, and there are 3 stakeholders, each of which owns 3 shares, and the current market price is stated at $3 per share. So the computed market cap, it's equal to $27. So it's 9 shares outstanding times $3 per share would give you the $27. Now let's assume that the brokers where these 3 individuals are registered at decide to lend these 3 shares, which are highlighted in gray here, to 3 short sellers. So the 3 short sellers enter the market, they think that the price will go down, they decide to borrow 3 shares, and their intent is to sell these 3 shares and eventually buy them back at a lower price, which in turn they can return it to the brokers that eventually will return it to the original stakeholders. So let's say that these 3 short sellers decide to sell these 3 stocks at $3 per share. And let's assume that there are 3 new entrants that want to own this stock. So they decide to buy them from these 3 short sellers at $3 each. Eventually, what the 3 short sellers currently have, it's $3 each, but they own no stock. In turn, each one of them owes 1 stock to the broker, so they'll have to give back to the broker 1 stock each for a total of 3 shares. So they are hoping that the price goes down, they can buy the stock at a much lower price and eventually return the stock, so they'll realize a profit because they sold the stock at $3. They already have $3 in cash. And so now eventually what we have is a total of 9 shares outstanding, which never changed. But now we have 3 new buyers here that bought the 3 stocks from the 3 short sellers. And this position is not closed out because eventually what you're seeing here is 9 shares owned by the original stakeholders. 3 of them were lended out, which were in turn sold by the short sellers to 3 new individuals. So if you look at the number of circles here, it seems as if there are 12 number of shares, but in reality there are only 9 stock certificates. So this position would have to be closed at some point, and the brokers could eventually just force the short sellers to close their positions, meaning they would have to buy back the shares and then return them to the original stakeholders. So just to recap, we have the 3 original stakeholders, which own 9 shares in total at $3 per share. Then we have the short sellers, which sold the stock at $3 each. So it's $9 in cash, but they have 0 stock, and in turn they owe 3 stocks to the brokers, and eventually the brokers would have to give those 3 stocks back to the original holders. Now the 3 new entrants bought 1 stock each from the 3 short sellers at $3 per share. Now let's assume that the Wall Street bet users enter this market, and they decide they want to buy 3 shares. But the new shareholders represented here to the right, they don't want to sell unless the price goes up. So the Wall Street bet users decide to buy the shares for slightly higher, let's say $4 per share. And their intent is not to sell. So essentially what they want to create is a shortage of number of stocks in the market so that the short sellers would have to buy them back from them at a much higher price. So the Wall Street bet users will buy these 3 shares at $4 each. So they'll own 3 stocks, and the most recent market price is $4 because that is the latest transaction that occurred, and that will drive the price. Now, where we stand in terms of total number of shares, so now the price is up, it's at $4 because the last transaction was executed at $4 per share. The original shareholders still own 9 shares, but 3 of those shares are owed to them by the brokers, and the short sellers owe the shares to the brokers. Now Wall Street Bets owns 3 shares at $4 each, and eventually they decide not to sell unless the price goes up. So the short sellers now are forced to buy the shares at a higher price than they sold them. So if you recall, they sold them at $3 each, so they each have $3 in cash. Now they have to buy them back from the Wall Street Bet users let's say at $5. So that's the maximum that they are willing to hold. And if the price goes to 5, they decide to sell. So once they sell, the short sellers will buy those 3 shares back, and in turn will return those 3 shares to the brokers. The brokers will in turn return those 3 shares to the original shareholders, and the price now is actually $5 because that was the last transaction. So now the original shareholders own 9 shares. There are no other holders of this stock, and the most recent stock price was at $5. Now eventually what could happen is that the price went up and the short sellers lost because they actually sold the shares at $3 each, but they bought them back at 5. So it's a $2 cash loss, meaning that is a 66% loss. So if they decide not to eventually short the stock any longer, then if any one of these 3 stakeholders are willing to buy or sell from each other, they were willing to hold it at 3, so eventually the price will go down unless there are new entrants that are willing to buy the stock at $5. So that $5 stock will not hold. The issue is that once that price goes up to 5, then you have new short sellers. So these are not the 3 short sellers that we talked earlier, but these are new short sellers that they see the price going up. They think it's going to crash at some point, so they eventually enter the market again, and they could borrow the same number, like let's say 3 shares again. They can sell them for $5 each, so they can realize $5 in cash, and eventually are hoping that the price will go down, that they will buy them back. But let's say that the Wall Street bet users increase in numbers, and eventually they are not willing to do the same thing, and they are going to hold those shares. And once they hold those shares, the short sellers are forced to essentially buy those shares back at an even higher price than 5. So they keep driving the price up. Now there are instances when the short interest goes down, and once the short interest goes down, meaning no new short sellers are entering the market, then eventually that loop gets broken. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Please don't hesitate to subscribe. We'll put some very good examples going forward, and they'll be very easy to follow.